village swam before me for my inspection. It was an image in 3 dimensions. It could only be seen by employing mage sight, and it was a spell that had become a familiar tool during my 6-month tenure in the rustic mountain hamlet of Minden's Hall. The preparation had been intensive. It had taken weeks of constant study when I had first set up shop, walking every inch of the tiny village and meeting every person who lived within. But when I was done, the resulting map the spell manifested was as complete a representation of the village as I was capable of crafting. Fire is the easiest element to detect, and my wards were a point of professional pride. I'm really good with fire spells, so there should be no fire. While my protection runes were loosely wrought enough to allow for some flame, else nothing inside the village would ever get cooked, the wards should have quickly extinguished any serious enough unauthorized fire with the intensity necessary to burn damp thatch, unless something had pushed through my wards. That thought sobered me another measure, and I wisely decided to investigate a bit before plunging headlong into the night. My stomach lurched unpleasantly as I studied the spell, and it only got worse the longer I took. My inspection of my wards in mage sight was clear. There were several areas of excitement that should not have been there, had my wards remained intact. Before the dire implications of that really set in, I heard the first of the screams, a high, panicked, girlish voice that stopped abruptly. I had heard screams like that before, in the jungle villages of Farisi, thousands of leagues south of here. A scream of fear and panic and terror, of being woken up in the middle of the night to the sight of violence and blood. The first time I'd heard it, it had been when I'd helped raid a village of peasants whose lords were on the wrong side of the war. You don't forget that sound. My feeble brain knew it was unlikely to be bandits. The village of Minden's Hall lays within Beauval Vale, as peaceful a domain as I'd ever seen, high in the western Minden Mountains and remote from the trade routes that bandits were traditionally attracted to. Any self-respecting bandit wouldn't starve here, but he wouldn't prosper. There just wasn't enough coin in a primarily barter economy. The local people had little more than cheese and cattle to steal. Professional soldiers or unemployed mercenaries were also unlikely. It wasn't unknown for mercenary companies between engagements to occasionally sack a village out of boredom and need for loot, but there weren't any mercenaries closer than the next barony, or the town of Tudry, leagues to the east as far as I knew. I quickly dismissed the idea of an inter-house war as well. The local lord, Sire Coucy of House Brandmount, was a kindly, mature nobleman who didn't seem to have any enemies that I could tell. He and his younger brother, who held the smaller portion of his domain, got along like brothers were supposed to. Nor was the distinguished old knight engaged in a feud. His borders were unthreatened by his noble neighbours. That left 2 possibilities. A peasant uprising, which seemed just as highly unlikely. I'd never seen peasants so pleasantly free and content as those in Beauval. Or, oh crap. There was only one other reasonable possibility. I cursed savagely and reached for my weapons belt as the mage map dissipated from my attention, and I was suddenly very much awake. I hadn't touched my weapons harness in months. The last time was to move it from the foot of my bed to a peg on the wall, and I hadn't even bothered to draw my sword back then. A slender, utilitarian army-issue mage blade. I drew it now and then pushed it back into its scabbard. It was even getting a little rusty. A spellmonger in a remote mountain village just doesn't have occasion to use a war mage's tools. That's why I was way the hell up here in the middle of nowhere in the first place. As impressive as a war wand or mage blade might be to the rubes, as tools they were rarely useful for removing warts, discouraging rats from nesting or finding lost livestock, which is how I spent most of my professional time these days. If I'd had my way, the harness would have stayed on the wall until the spells faded away and the leather rotted. But the leather slipped easily over my shoulders, and I could feel the tingle of magic from the war wands, like I was back in the army again. I hated that feeling. I moved out to the country in the first place.
Para seguir escuchando este audiolibro gratuitamente, haz clic en el enlace de la descripción y podrás escucharlo completo sin coste gracias a la prueba de 30 días de Audible.